Joined by two guests. Joan Claybrook is a longtime consumer advocate, and she's former president of Public Citizen. Rocky Anderson is also with us. He's the former mayor of Salt Lake City and the founder and director of High Road for Human Rights. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Rocky Anderson, your overall response to President Obama's State of the Union address?
Well, I listened to every word very carefully, and he has a great way of presenting himself, but there was so much missing and so many major disconnects. We're at a time in our country where we need to define who we are, where we're headed, what we have become. He didn't mention human rights at a time when he has assassination lists for the first time in our nation's history that include U.S. citizens. No due process. We don't just have indefinite detention anymore. We just go out, put their name on a list, and kill them. The invocation of state secrets, it's absolutely obliterated any notion of checks and balances. Our courts have been removed from that equation by and large when it comes to torture, when it comes to warrantless wiretapping by our government. No discussion about that, of course. And we're seeing really an institutionalization by this president of some of the worst abuses and what a lot of us thought were just aberrations during the Bush years. But also the disconnect between saying that we're at a Sputnik moment, we're going to make all these great investments and build our economy, and then what's he building the economy on? He says it's based on tax cuts. He sounded like Ronald Reagan. It sounded like trickle-down economics. And how do you freeze domestic annual spending and at the same time make these tremendous investments that are needed in our infrastructure and doing what's required to get people back to work? He didn't mention the middle class, the huge disparity between the very wealthy. There hasn't been a greater disparity in this country in wealth and income since the 1920s. The top 1% have more net wealth than the bottom 90% in this country. These are the basics. These are the fundamentals. And it was all ignored. And it really seems that these two parties, bought and paid for by the same interests, by and large, are not providing the kinds of solutions or addressing the fundamentals that the American people are most interested in, that impact the American people the most. And then, of course, I heard the word purpose when he was talking about Afghanistan. And I thought, finally, we're going to hear an explication by the President of the United States about why we're there. And then it wasn't there at all. He talked in one sentence. It was basically just an aside about how we're seeking to control the Taliban to stop al-Qaeda, ignoring, it seems, the fact that al-Qaeda has become the cellular network around the world, driven in large part, probably in greatest part, by the fact that the United States has invaded and occupied these Muslim countries and continues to kill innocent Muslim civilians.
Joan Claybrook, you are a leading consumer advocate. You're the president emerita of Public Citizen. You're here in Park City at the Sundance Film Festival. Actually, we played a clip of a movie yesterday called Hot Coffee, where you talked about legislation that limits people's ability to access the courts. But first, overall, your response to what President Obama had to say last night.
Well, first of all, I think that this was his first campaign speech of 2012. And he was attempting to preempt the Republicans from going after some of the things that that he's advocated. And the thing that really bothered me the most was that he's going to cut domestic spending for programs that are essential for Americans. And I look at his new framework of being a business-friendly administration and say to myself, have they earned this? Have the Wall Street guys who robbed and plundered America, have they earned a seat at the table from this president? Have the guys who harmed homeowners and sent all these poor families into foreclosure, Have they earned a seat at the table in a, quote, business-friendly administration? Not to me. I also look at the whole issue of regulation. He's issued an edict that says that every government agency ought to cut some regulations. Now, we're not talking about some obscure thing. We're talking about the environment, global warming, health, safety, pharmaceutical issues, auto safety, truck safety, all these issues that matter every day to Americans. And what that sends is a message. It sends a message to the civil servants who sweat to try and get these issues dealt with and to protect the American public, that their president isn't going to support them if they get into a controversial issue. And every regulation almost is controversial because somebody doesn't want it, particularly big business. And it sends a message to the business interests that they can go with impunity and oppose these regulatory programs. And they know that the president is probably going to clamp down on the people who are issuing the rules. And these rules matter. They really matter when you have, for example, a very controversial one pending is hours of service for truck drivers. And it kills 5,000 people a year and injures, almost 100,000 people a year. Just think of the consequences for American families with just that one rule. And then it sends a message to Congress, and particularly Congressman Issa of California, who's the new head of the Oversight Committee, who wants to go after the regulatory program, who went to the business interests and said, what do you want to kill? So I see that the president is not really addressing the issues that matter to American people.
Daniel Issa, believed to be, I think, the wealthiest member of Congress.
Right.
Step away from the car is his line. I think it's in his voice. That's where he got his wealth from. What was the system for protecting cars, the car alarm system.
Right.
I want to turn for a minute to something else President Obama talked about, and it's about limiting what they call frivolous lawsuits. This is President Obama in his State of the Union address.
This means further reducing health care costs, including programs like Medicare and Medicaid, which are the single biggest contributor to our long-term deficit. The health insurance law we passed last year will slow these rising costs, which is part of the reason that nonpartisan economists have said that repealing the health care law would add $250 billion to our deficit. Still, I'm willing to look at other ideas to bring down costs, including one that Republicans suggested last year: medical malpractice reform to rein in frivolous lawsuits.
That was President Obama talking about medical malpractice reform to rein in frivolous lawsuits. Your response, Joan Claybrick?
My response is that I'm outraged to hear this. First of all, they're not frivolous lawsuits in the medical malpractice area because the lawyers who take these cases don't get paid unless they win. So they're not going to take frivolous lawsuits. That's the first thing. Secondly, medical malpractice kills between 40 and 100,000 people a year. 5% of the doctors cause 55% of the medical malpractice in this country. The medical system does not discipline themselves. And so the only way that you can have any kind of redress against repeat offender doctors is to have the opportunity for people to sue and to make sure that these doctors are eventually disciplined. The harm is horrific, and what he wants to do is to put a cap on damages so that the president is deciding the value that these poor people who are injured should get, and the individuals are then limited under such arbitrary caps on the amount of money they can recover. They're limited to that amount. And I'm in a family that was in this Hot Coffee movie that had awarded, the jury awarded them for their baby who was born with brain damage. They were awarded almost $6 million. The cap on damages got them $125 million. So who pays the difference?
1.25.
1.25 million, sorry. And so who gets the difference? Who pays the difference? It's the state, the taxpayers. They have to pick up the care. And this family have no capacity to make sure their child is taken care of when they die. And it's a 24/7 job for the mother to take care of a brain-damaged child. And she gets no compensation whatsoever. And the doctor walks away scot-free.
And the insurance industry.
And the insurance industry, you know, who should be paying for this, charges high fees to the doctors and don't pay the benefits.
I wanted to turn to Dr. Atul Gawande. He is well-known staff writer for The New Yorker, doctor in Boston.